I guess I should start at the beginning, right? Not that it really matters now, but maybe someone out there will understand me. Maybe they won't judge me the way my husband did. I always thought my marriage was fine, you know. Not perfect, but good enough. I met Mark when we were both in our 20s, fresh out of college. We were the kind of couple everyone envied. We had the house, the dog, the couple of vacations a year. On paper, we had it all. But I'll admit, over the years, something changed. It wasn't like I stopped loving him, or maybe I did, but in a way that's hard to describe. I'm sure some people know what I mean. It wasn't that I wanted out. It wasn't that I was unhappy all the time, but I started to feel like something was missing. I wanted more. I wanted excitement. I wanted someone to see me, really see me, not just as Mark's wife, or the girl who brings in the groceries. I didn't want to be boring. That's when the neighbor, Brian, started to change everything. He wasn't anything special at first. Just a regular guy, about my age, living next door. He moved in about 6 months ago, and for the first month, we barely spoke. He was always working late, and I was, well, just living my life. But one day, I was in the yard when I noticed him struggling with some furniture, clearly trying to move it by himself. I offered to help, thinking it would be just a neighborly thing to do. That was the first time he really looked at me, not the casual hello or small talk over the fence, but like he was really seeing me. His smile, that way he held eye contact a little longer than necessary. I don't know, it felt different. It felt good. We didn't talk about anything deep that day. Just the usual. Where I was from, what I did for work, and him doing the same. But I felt this little spark, this thing I hadn't felt in a long time. From that day on, he'd wave a little longer when we passed each other on our driveways. Or he'd stop by to ask if I wanted to grab a coffee since we were both working from home most of the time. At first, it was innocent, just friendly gestures. But with each passing week, I started to look forward to those moments. He made me feel noticed again. Not like I was just some housewife running errands, and that's where I went wrong. Brian was different. He was attentive. In ways Mark had stopped being. We'd talk about everything: movies, books, politics, the way the world was changing. I didn't have to filter myself around him. He listened to me, really listened, and made me feel like I mattered. It was refreshing. I felt like I was getting a glimpse of who I used to be before I settled into this comfortable, predictable life. Looking back, I know I was craving something I couldn't articulate, but he gave it to me. This feeling of being alive. That was dangerous, and I should have known that. It all changed one afternoon, after Mark left for his usual work trip. It was just supposed to be a quick stop by Brian's place to borrow some tools for the garden. But when I walked in, I don't know what happened. The air felt different, charged. It wasn't just his usual grin or the way he leaned against the doorframe. It was everything. He invited me in, and I stayed longer than I should have. I should have left. I should have turned around, said something casual, and just walked out. But I didn't. I stayed. We talked some more, drank a little wine, and then I found myself laughing a little too hard at something he said. The tension between us grew. Heavy, palpable. Then, before I even realized what was happening, he was kissing me. I didn't stop it. I didn't want to. It was like I had forgotten who I was, but now I was being reminded. And when his hands were on me, I felt. I don't know, wanted. In a way I hadn't felt in forever. It wasn't like I planned it. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, today's the day I'm going to cheat. It wasn't like that at all. But in that moment, I felt like everything else faded away. It was just Brian and me, in a way that was so different from the life I had at home. I didn't think about Mark. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about anything except the way Brian's touch made me feel. And when it was over, I remember just feeling guilty. But there was also this other part of me that didn't want to feel guilty. I didn't want to face the reality that I had just done something I never imagined I would, and that's how it all started. I didn't know it then, but that one moment would change everything. It would destroy what I thought I had with Mark, and I never could have prepared for the aftermath. To be honest, even now, I can't entirely explain why I did it. It wasn't about Brian being better than Mark or anything. It wasn't like I hated my husband or wanted to ruin my marriage. But I was bored, I was lonely, and somewhere deep inside, I wanted something that made me feel alive again. I've spent the last few months trying to justify it, trying to make sense of it all. But I can't. All I know is that, in that moment, I made a choice I'll regret forever. And I'm still not sure what comes next. After that first time with Brian, things didn't just go back to normal. I don't even think I wanted them to. The problem was, once that door opened, I couldn't close it. It felt like I was addicted to something. This feeling of being seen, desired, needed in a way I hadn't been in so long. And as guilty as I felt, there was also a thrill to it. The secrecy, the excitement of sneaking around, the adrenaline. It was intoxicating. I wasn't the kind of person who thought they could have an affair. Or at least, I never thought I would. But here I was, sneaking away for quick meetings in the middle of the day, texting Brian when Mark was out of the house, making up excuses. I was doing exactly what I had promised myself I would never do. The first time I saw Brian again, after that afternoon, I was a wreck. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I was so scared that I would ruin everything, but he just smiled, like everything was fine. Like it hadn't been a huge deal. I was relieved but also confused. Was he playing me? Was this just a game for him? Or did he actually care? We didn't talk about that afternoon, not at first. Instead, we talked like we always had, about everything and nothing. But then, when the moment was right, he reached for me again. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. The pull between us was too strong, and honestly, part of me was still excited by the idea that I could do something so forbidden. Something that made me feel alive in a way I couldn't remember. It was crazy. It was reckless. But for those brief moments, I felt like I was reclaiming something I didn't even know I'd lost. But then, the guilt would come back. It hit me hardest when I would hear Mark's voice from the other room, or when I'd see him doing something sweet, like picking up my favorite ice cream, just because he knew I liked it. I would feel this wave of nausea hit me, the realization that I was betraying him. That's when I'd tell myself I'd stop, that it was just a fling, just something I needed to get out of my system. But the next time I saw Brian, the next time he kissed me, I was back to square one. It was a cycle. And each time I saw Brian, I felt more and more tangled in it. One afternoon, Mark and I had one of those conversations where everything seemed fine, but something felt off. He asked me how my day was, and I lied, like I'd gotten so good at doing. He told me he loved me, but I didn't feel it the way I used to. Or maybe it wasn't that I didn't feel it. I just didn't know how to feel anymore. I wanted to be honest with him, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words. How could I? How could I look into his eyes and tell him that I had been with someone else? That I had betrayed him with the one person who was supposed to be my partner in life. How could I tell him I was losing myself in this affair, and it was so easy to do? There was one moment that stands out. Mark had been away for a weekend trip with his friends, and Brian came over to check on something in the yard. It wasn't anything unusual, but this time, when I let him in, the air was different. We were standing in my kitchen, just talking, when he kissed me again. This time, it wasn't quick or careless. It was slow, like he was savoring it. It felt intense, like everything else in the world didn't matter for those few minutes. And right then, I knew I was in too deep. I knew I was playing with fire. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. When Mark came home, I told myself I'd stop. I'd cut it off with Brian. I'd stop being this person who I didn't even recognize anymore. But when he walked through that door, I just couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. How could I? Mark could see that something was off. He wasn't stupid. He kept asking me if I was okay, and I kept saying I was. I thought if I told him, if I let it out, I would lose him. And part of me wasn't ready for that. But I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending. I didn't know that it was all about to come crashing down. I guess it's hard to explain how things went from, I don't know, normal-ish to disastrous in such a short time. It wasn't one big fight or some dramatic confrontation that led to everything falling apart. It wasn't even a moment when I thought something was going to happen. It just did. Looking back, I think it all started that evening when Brian did something that caught me completely off guard. Something that still makes me shiver when I think about it. Mark had been gone again for another work trip. He was away a lot, and I think that made it easier for me to slip into this secret life with Brian. It started innocently enough, but now I could feel the tension building, like I was playing with a bomb, just waiting for it to go off. That night, Brian came over to check on some repairs I needed help with in the basement. But this time, there was something different in the way he looked at me. Something in his eyes that made my stomach do flips. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was like there was an understanding between us. We were in the basement, and I was watching him work. He wasn't saying much, but the silence between us felt thick, heavy. He finally stopped and turned to me with that same intense look. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me," he said, his voice low. "You don't have to keep acting like everything is okay when it's not." I just stared at him confused. "What do you mean?" "I can tell you're not happy," he continued, stepping closer. "You don't need to keep up this act. I'm here, and I get it. You don't need to lie to me." It was like he was reading my mind, like he knew exactly how I felt. Lost, detached, like I was trying to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers. It was exactly what I had been feeling. But I didn't say that. Instead, I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. "Everything's fine," I said, hoping I could convince myself as much as I was trying to convince him. Brian didn't buy it. He stepped closer until there was almost no space between us. I could feel the heat from his body, and I don't know what happened next. I think, somewhere deep inside, I wanted him to push me over the edge. I wanted him to make the decision for me because I was too scared to make it myself. He tilted my chin up, his thumb brushing my lower lip, and my breath caught. My heart started racing in my chest, like I couldn't get enough oxygen. And then, he kissed me again. This time it was different, harder, more urgent. There was no teasing, no slow build-up. It was as if everything that had been left unsaid between us had just come to a head. For a moment, I thought about stopping. I thought about running upstairs, locking myself in the bedroom, and never seeing him again. But I didn't. I kissed him back. And that was the moment I completely let go. His hands were all over me, touching me, pulling me close. And when I pulled back, breathless, he didn't let me escape. "You want this?" he whispered. "I can feel it." I didn't answer. What could I say? I could feel it too. I was burning. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in so long. I don't know why I didn't stop. I don't know why I didn't think about Mark, or the fact that I was married, or the consequences of what was happening. All I could think about was the way Brian made me feel. Like I mattered. Like I was worth something. We didn't even make it upstairs. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We were right there, in the basement, surrounded by half-finished projects and tools I hadn't used in months. And that was where we went all the way. I wish I could say I regretted it, but I didn't. At least, not in the moment. The guilt would come later. Afterward, when I had time to think. But right then, it felt like a release. Like I was breaking free from something that had been holding me hostage for so long. But here's the kicker. The part that really changed everything. When we were finished, Brian didn't act like it was a one-time thing. He didn't even act like it was a casual fling. He looked at me, his eyes dark with something that felt like triumph, but also possession. "You can't go back now," he said, his voice rough. "You've crossed a line." It was a warning. It was a challenge. And I didn't know it at the time, but those words, those exact words, were the beginning of the end. I stood there, trying to catch my breath, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. I wasn't sure if I was scared, or excited, or both. But I knew that I had just done something irreversible. And now, there was no going back. When Mark came home the next day, nothing seemed different at first. He asked how my day was. He kissed me on the cheek and made dinner. Just like always. But it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. And every time I looked at him, I knew he couldn't see it. He couldn't see how I had changed. How the woman standing in front of him wasn't the woman he had married. I had crossed a line. And even though part of me wanted to pull away from Brian, wanted to stop this mess before it completely ruined my life, I didn't. I couldn't. I was in too deep. That's when I started to see it. That slow, inevitable unraveling. Because once you've done something like that, once you've let that kind of darkness into your life, you can't just pretend it's all fine. It's not fine. And that's when the questions started. The doubt. The cracks in everything I thought I knew. Mark started to notice the little things. The way I'd pull away from him at night. How I'd check my phone more often, like I was waiting for something, or someone. He didn't say anything at first. But I could tell. I could feel it. The suspicion, like a dark cloud hanging over us. And it didn't take long before everything exploded. I could feel the moment everything started to fracture, like the earth splitting beneath my feet, but I never imagined it would end like this. No warning. No signs that it was all about to come crashing down. It was one of those moments where the truth hits you like a freight train, and there's no way to avoid it. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was supposed to be at home, cleaning up the house, maybe doing laundry, you know. The usual stuff. Mark was supposed to be working on a project at his office, and he had mentioned earlier in the week that he wouldn't be home until late. So, I thought I was safe. I hadn't planned on Brian coming over. Well, that's not entirely true. I did plan it. I invited him, but I wasn't expecting Mark to come home early. I should have been more careful. I should have thought this through. But in that moment, I was so caught up in everything that was happening, I didn't consider the consequences. I remember hearing the door open. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe I was imagining things. But then I heard Mark's voice, calling out from the hallway. "Hey, babe, I'm home early." My heart stopped. It's like my entire body froze in place. Brian was still sitting on the couch. He'd been here for maybe an hour, just talking and having a drink. I wasn't even thinking about how risky it was. I wasn't thinking about Mark, or the life we had together, or how much I had to lose. I just felt this rush of panic and excitement. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. I could hear Mark's footsteps coming closer, and I had to make a decision. Should I hide? Should I try to play it cool, pretend nothing was happening? Or should I be honest, admit everything and deal with the consequences? I didn't do any of that. Instead, I froze, my mind racing. Brian's eyes met mine, wide with surprise, but also a little too calm. He didn't seem panicked. He just sat there, almost like he was waiting for this moment, like he knew something I didn't. And then, just before Mark walked into the living room, Brian stood up. "Hey, Mark," he said, casually, like everything was normal. Mark stood in the doorway for a second, blinking as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. And then it hit him. The confusion, the hurt, the shock, all of it crashing over his face in one moment. I don't even remember what I said. I think I tried to smile, but it felt fake. I couldn't even pretend anymore. Mark stood there, silent for a beat too long, staring at both of us like we were strangers. Then he said, in a voice so quiet, it almost didn't sound like him. "What the hell is going on here?" I don't know why, but I felt this overwhelming rush of guilt. It was like I was drowning in it. But at the same time, there was this weird, sharp relief. It was over. He knew. There was no hiding, no pretending anymore. I stood up quickly, my heart racing. "Mark, it's not what you think." But he cut me off, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think." His eyes flicked to Brian, and then back to me, like he was waiting for me to say something that made sense, something that could explain this mess away. Brian was still standing there, too calm, too collected. I remember feeling this wave of anger rise in me. At myself, at Mark, at the situation that had gotten so out of control. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark asked, almost whispering now. "Why the hell didn't you just tell me you were unhappy? You didn't have to do this." The words stung, more than I thought they would. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but I couldn't. What could I say? I had lied. I had betrayed him. There was no justification. There was nothing I could say that would make it right. Brian finally spoke up, his voice steady. But there was something else in it. Something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just indifference. There was almost a sense of ownership in his tone, like he felt entitled to be there, to take up space in my life. "I didn't mean to hurt you, man," Brian said, his eyes now flicking between Mark and me. "But you gotta understand, we're adults. Sometimes things happen." I felt like I was about to collapse. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was how it ended. My marriage, my life as I knew it, just gone in an instant. Mark's face twisted in pain. His eyes locked on mine, but I couldn't bear to look back at him. I knew I had destroyed everything. "How long, Ellie?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How long has this been going on?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was a one-time mistake, that it hadn't meant anything. But I couldn't lie anymore. "A few months," I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was a long silence, a thick, suffocating silence, and then Mark spoke again, but this time, his voice was cold, empty. "So, this whole time, you've been lying to me?" While I was out there thinking everything was fine. He shook his head, and for a second, I thought he was about to walk out the door. "I don't even know who you are anymore." And then, just like that, he turned and walked out. I could hear his footsteps in the hall, getting further away, the sound of the front door slamming behind him echoing in my chest like the final nail in a coffin. Brian didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me, watching as I crumbled into myself. It was like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stop the tears. They came, hot and uncontrollable, and I felt like I was losing everything at once. Brian didn't comfort me. He didn't say, "It's going to be okay," or anything else. He just watched me cry, and I hated him for it in that moment. But I hated myself more. I had ruined everything. Mark was gone. He didn't even wait for an explanation. He didn't care. And I knew, deep down in that aching, raw place, I had lost him for good. And now, all I had left was this mess I had created.